All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hunting for Silver Linings. Today is March 18th. I'm here in the Great Lakes region of the United States, chapter director of Grand Rapids, Michigan. I'm joined by my colleague, Yorgo Katsanos. He is with Kubera International as the head of corporate finance. You're here in West Michigan also right now, right?
Yes, indeed. I'm in Michigan. I'm enjoying this beautiful weather, believe me.
That's
Can't wait to
awesome.
get
Yeah.
back to the beach. It's cold.
Yeah, hopefully you'll join me when I go on my little road show pretty soon and visit our chapter director in San Diego. But today we are joined with we're joined by Henry Sue, chapter director in Vancouver. This is a check-in. We had a conversation with him last year in the midst of the pandemic. And so if you're curious about Vancouver, some of the support organizations and all the work that he's been doing since he founded that chapter, take a listen to that recording. But Henry, so good to have you again with us.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for the invite.
We're absolutely thrilled to learn about what's been going on since we checked in last. Maybe you can give a little quick recap of like who you are, a little bit about the Vancouver chapter, and then we'll dig in.
Sure. So my name is Henry Sue. I run the Vancouver chapter of Startup Grind. So basically your cousin in Canada. In terms of the chapter, it's been around 10 years, went dormant for a while, and we just took it over about 3 years ago. I've been involved probably about 2 years now. It's part of the process, just like delving into the ecosystem and seeing where we can add value, I would say. Vancouver as an ecosystem, there's probably 135 groups, where that's universities and accelerators, co-working spaces, like helping startups. And so we're kind of finding our niche in that market by really focusing on like helping local, but also global. And of course, like, we have our conference and our startup program. And so our real goal is kind of help startups move towards that process, to have that support network, locally and globally as well.
So we understand, that cities like Vancouver are great landing pads for folks. And before we hit record, Yorgo was what brought up some of the work that you do aside from Startup Grind. Yorgo, did you have some specific questions you wanted to start with, or do you want to let Henry go?
I think at this stage it's better for Henry to walk us through the last year since our last interview, because Vancouver has emerged as a major hub both for innovation but also friendliness, and I will also say political correctness in more than one ways. So I can't wait for Henry to give us the update.
Sure thing. So yeah, since our last talk, I mean, a lot has definitely happened in the landscape here. Just recently, just a couple of companies that we've had the privilege to interview. One company called Dewey actually raised 20 million just like recently, so a 3 million seed and 17 million Series A. And it's interesting story is that part of where we're doing our interview with them, because there's so many events happening that there's like a wires got mixed, and so we ended up actually ending up interviewing, instead of the CEO, which everyone was there kind of wanted to listen to, we interviewed the CTO, and one of his co-founders. And so part of it is like with the CTO, it was interesting as we delve into a topic that not everyone wants to talk about, and that was like mental health. Because like typically we hear the stories of like big exits, big raises, like you mentioned, Vancouver's like a really in terms of like standard living, people like coming here. It's good for a family. In Canada, of course, we have all these like social programs, and in that instance, the people are very inclined to come here. In terms of like the business, kind of like the tech environment, yeah, it's definitely growing leaps and bounds. I was just looking at a report from Deloitte. So they do a top 50, Canadian company, fast up and coming, growing company, and one of the companies had 3,000% revenue growth over 3 years. So it's crazy, like some of these numbers. In terms of like what I'm working on, so I run a company called Subtly, of course. So it's on-demand concierge platform for new immigrants, and we connect them to local services all the way to getting your citizenship. And we do a lot of like vetting for like service providers. So we get a lot of, feedback on some of the stuff that they're encountering. We kind of help them streamline their process. So it's just think like 80% of the content we educate people on, and the 20% is really would be using, for example, if you're like in the financial space, your expertise in terms of like, whether that's vetting or providing a framework on how to kind of look at things. And so in the immigration space, and of course, what was happening down south where you are, obviously if the borders closed because of COVID, it was very difficult. Our focus really, not say shifted, but other demands kind of came from people that just think that you're a person that's looking to come in country. Maybe you applied for your immigration, but the challenge is like typically you're really excited to come here, right? And so our premise was that we're going to prepare you so once you land, you're not like starting like fresh, just with excitement. Once excitement kind of dies down, you're living like the day to day. You're like, getting confused, and you don't get your accreditation, and you kind of fall in this spiral. Also around mental health, and so part of what we saw is that more and more people are asking about like policy, like what will happen to my immigration application. Will like Canada change its policy? Did I make a right choice? So we're working more on not necessarily just like educating maybe on that level, providing as much of support as we could. And that was also working with like, but on the flip side, our business like inland, like people that are here already that maybe experience these problems kind of like took a really like a growth spurt. And part of that is like we're kind of working to trying to find a pricing model because we're using a concierge kind of like high touch model. And there's like two components. One is like an online component where it's going to be like subscription, maybe like SaaS space. But the key thing is like that is the high touch, is like that connectivity that we want to provide to people so that when they need the help, it's there at any moment of time. And the biggest challenge in that was like we were having people that just want us to do it for them. And I'm like, no, we're doing this already without like technology. We want to kind of like use the technology to automate this process, provide a better seamless experience for you so that you don't really have to think about it. It's there for you. And if, for example, if you're like a business person maybe and you're coming here for your family, you have your parents come here, they don't understand English, it's kind of like insurance for you. And for a service provider, it's what they do all day anyways. So it's like we're making their process easier for people to understand so they can really get to building a relationship and a longer term relationship. And so within the service providers, within that ecosystem, I would say, they're doing referrals amongst each other. And we don't necessarily take a cut of any of that. We'll take it, but, that's not really our business model.
How successful have you been in this process, Henry? What kind of feedback are you getting from your customers?
Feedback, in terms of feedback, I mean, there's definitely a lot of demands, and we're trying to cover a lot of ground. Typically you might have like a SaaS platform that just focuses on one area, like say health. And so I guess like the biggest challenge is, even for ourselves, is like we're learning other people's processes and some of our legacy, of course, like legacy. And so it's kind of like, for example, if we're working with an immigration lawyer and he goes, we have like 81 categories of immigration. And that's not what I want to hear, not what the person wants to hear. They just want to get their thing done. They're looking for you as expertise. And so it's a little bit of a different kind of like maybe cultural kind of challenge where you think that if you're going into like a store, you may know what you want. And then, the salesperson might go like, okay, have you considered this? We have this as well. Or this other thing came in. You want to go, oh, here, try this sample, try this kind of thing. Where in Asia, it's like the biggest challenge is building trust. And then once the trust is established, they look at you to know everything. And so it can be overburdened, like, oh, you got to know every single thing, like every person in Canada, because you're in Canada. And this is something I experienced when I was in China as well. Is like, okay, well, tell me everything about Canada. Well, that's so vague, right? It's like, I can give you kind of a perspective. For example, okay, the tech ecosystem, these are the main players. This is how we see our role. Here are some of the challenges. What we feel here is like, you look at other ecosystems that work really well, and the culture and values that they built. So like, for example, you look at like Startup Grind, it grew very organically, and there's a lot of things that you can kind of learn from that and incorporate into kind of things that we're doing. And so I think the other challenge is hiring, and so we're kind of going that process. It kind of got a bit of a stall because people can't come here, but at the same time, they can kind of like work with us online and see kind of stuff that we're doing online. They can kind of learn more about the process themselves. Everyone is pretty much like one layer removed. And of course, like with the election, everything was happening down south, people are like, okay, I'm gonna like move my company to Canada, like literally pick up and sell my house, and this is for my children because I don't believe it's this policy or that policy. And I'm kind of like, okay, before you go too extreme, like one way or the other, first you got to see what the criteria is to even come here, right? And so, is there a certain policy for maybe one was like an ad agency, right? And so, then we're talking to like industry players here, like, okay, are there opportunities for like partnership, collaboration? Like, how can you make their entry, if they decide to do that, easier? If this person gets elected or that person gets elected. And so we try to be really kind of impartial, and they really appreciate that. I mean, other things that we've encountered like along that process is, for example, this is actually through Startup Grind. We exhibited at the global conference last year, just before COVID, and the Times of India, a big media group there, reached out to us. Their venture arm in Toronto reached out to us and wanted like, how come you're not serving Indians, right? And I'm like, because this is a market that we're targeting. It's more kind of like high net worth people. There's a lot of free programs and whatnot. We don't want to label you or put you into any, segment you into any category, but like, this is how we're working. And maybe there's some people, maybe there's insight that you could provide me that I don't know. So we're always kind of learning and validating. One of the challenges is I guess like churn, right? And so churn is from people that we can't serve. And because we're not just like, we believe in the fundamentals, just like building any business. The fact that, you're startup and you're looking for a pulse, you're gonna move much faster and learn faster. So like, you don't have a big budget to work with. And a lot of money doesn't help sometimes, right? And so you become like stagnant and complacent, and you use money to fix problems. It becomes more like a PR kind of exercise. And so like in Vancouver, some of those challenges we are kind of like dealing with, in terms of even putting on events. It's like, okay, well, everyone else is doing an event, and then online now there's like Zoom fatigue and all this. Like, how do we provide that value, educate, like we say, inspire, educate, connect? And just recently, we're also getting other inquiries from people that just like landing in Vancouver, like for whatever reason, that might not use our service, but we're going like, oh, you're in the tech space, you have you have your startup in Tokyo, for example, and they're like, how can I help? I'm like, well, this is what we're doing, the Startup Grind. We're trying to have a list of companies, build companies so that there's a roadmap for them to go to global, introduce them to investors, really dig into the work, provide the workshops, introduce them to other chapters. And part of that process is like, that's kind of like really, I guess like in personally, it's really rewarding, because it's like, we're kind of using the same model no matter kind of like what we're doing. And, simple things just like letting people know about other people's events, like, currently every year we have a competition called New Ventures BC. So typically there's like 200 companies will apply. It's a competition over a number of months. There's like mentoring through that process, and there's money and prizes and in-kind things that people offer, and you can see the excitement, and a couple of years later you have companies that are like hyper growth, like literally hyper growth. Like there's one company called Jane AI, and they're doing like appointments set up, for medical, and their growth is like crazy through the roof. And for ourselves this year, we got selected again for like kind of like, it's called like Ready to Rocket. So it's actually a VC group here that puts out a list of like the up and coming companies, right? And so there's like 2 tracks, and we're an emerging track, right? And it's kind of difficult to understand because like we're not really a marketplace. We're kind of service based. We're kind of like a hybrid kind of model, and they're kind of like, so same thing what's going to happen with COVID, right? Like it's going to open, you're going to have like a screen open, and other people can come, join into your live event, right? It's actually going to open a bigger audience that maybe you're thinking of. It's just it's moved that process faster, and that's what we're kind of like seeing. But yeah, there's so many interesting stories here. Like even at the NFTs, a group called Dapper Labs of the NBA, where they're using it to sell collectibles using blockchain. Yeah, there's a lot of opportunities, not just like in that space, but other spaces. And we're just having a talk yesterday with some friends of mine on the blockchain. It's like, if the blockchain is corrupted, now what do you do, right? So it's like education, it's like accreditation, and they're talking about like, yeah, really high skilled, we came here, but we're really finding it's a struggle. Like it's like that is like the real story in a lot of ways. Like, and we always look at ways of how to like open opportunities for other people. Maybe they don't see that opportunity, and it's not just like they volunteer or whatnot. It's like really, really there on their path, and you're kind of discovering maybe what you like and what you don't like, right? You get a lot of excitement. I want to start a startup, but it's work, right? It comes down to work, and so you want to be a CEO or whatever, you can go up and print your own business cards. And that's all I would say is you print your own business cards. But, when it comes down to the nitty gritty, do you really want to do that, right? Is it really that important? And so typical questions that we kind of do is ask like, why you, why now? Like, what makes you so important, right? Like everyone is so important, right? So what makes you important, and like, how are you contributing to the bigger ecosystem? And so we found
now,
that
on the topic of on startups, like starting up, the actual like launching, we've seen a lot of like a burst of innovation and people starting ideas in Vancouver with real estate traditionally being like so high. What is, have you started to see some people like shifting in and out of the market, but then have you seen your chapter grow because of innovators, say in neighboring towns, like being able to have better access to these kinds of opportunities?
I believe so. I think it just increased like a connectivity that may be something that, well, we got to go do it, but we're so busy the day-to-day grind that you don't really think about that. Like myself, like I always go to other places and have a look, and it's the same thing going to like the valley, not be caught up in the hype, but understanding what works there. Maybe it doesn't work where we are. And that's like, okay, how do we localize it? And what we realize like here locally, the biggest challenge is like culture. So we're actually trying to change a culture, right? And so not like corporate culture per se, but just like people in general, like a Canadian culture of being very reserved and maybe conservative. And we had a discussion yesterday with a lady in the States, and I'm like, my accountant told us like in Canada we listen to the government, and then in the US they listen to themselves. Like what you kind of want, and you go for it. And so in Canada, you're a little bit hesitant to go do that. Doesn't mean there's no talent here. It's just like, okay, well, a VC is going to want to see a return. Like, will my money make you move faster? But if you're hesitant, then I'm going to be a little bit concerned. I think that is one of the challenges maybe here. And so it's kind of like not hyping them up, but it's like we look at the companies that like even I'm surprised. Like every day you're hearing this and that. And really, you're like 20 million, okay. Now, are they kind of like celebrating the raise? Or are they celebrating how is that moving to their next milestone, right? And so
are you suggesting that there's been a bit of a mindset shift in this the last year?
I believe so. Like, I mean, people that are in the startup space, you're always like struggling anyway, so it's no real different. I mean, like it is a pandemic. I think that maybe in terms of like connectivity, that you're not working in a co-working space together, part of it is like to get out of the building and talk to people. It's just the way that that's being done is a little bit has shifted, really. But it's open maybe other things that you never thought about. For a startup, it's not really that different. Like even 4 hours away from here, we have an area that is called the Okanagan. Like their tech ecosystem is like crazy growth over there, but we don't necessarily interact with them too much because they're always just go directly to the valley. They don't come to Vancouver, right? And then we have the island here. It's about a 2-hour ferry ride called Victoria, and there's a lot of stuff happening there as well. So we're finding that it's not just like, say, Vancouver. I mean, you have a laptop, you have a laptop, you have your phone. You could do a lot of things. Right? You have all you need is a net connection, and the cross connectivity that we kind of like see in startup grind. We're trying to do that in like smaller communities here. Let them know that. Yeah, let them know that we're not just about Vancouver. We're trying to help the ecosystem in general, right? And so
Sure.
There might be something unique to here, and like, okay, you're having challenges rating Series A. Okay, just look at your metrics and some of the stuff that you're doing and some of your challenges that you're encountering. Can we help on that front? Can we make that connection somewhere else? We also get like, of course, like calls and connections and stuff every day. Like, use my software. We can write cheaper software for you and whatnot. And when it comes down to it, it's just like people. Like that is like a skill that you have, but it's like connection amongst people to fulfill a goal that you're both wanting to fulfill, and then working through some of those expectations.
So I'm interested to hear a little bit about like we were talking earlier about there might be like there was kind of a talent squeeze in the US with our government support being so sporadic. It like lurched and stopped and started and stopped. Canada, while the government supported like smaller like amounts, say weekly, it was sustained. And there wasn't the lurching and the stopping. And here in the US specifically, we're looking at a year plus loss of education in some markets, and nothing was handled coordinated. So we're looking at maybe having a talent gap in the future. What does that all look like for you in BC, and how the government continues to support like families and education and the talent pipeline, all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's like there's both sides that you can kind of look at. You look at it like longer term, that we're gonna have our version of qualitative easing. It's gonna be a burden on your grandchildren and whatever, because like there is like an older population here that we gotta kind of support. And even say locally that like this, I think it was like last year that they eliminated like premiums for medical, which were not expensive to start with. It was about $100, a little bit over $100 for like a family of two. In terms of like the programs, definitely like a lot of programs, and a lot of like even from the tech association here, the CEO really like advocated a lobby, for companies that didn't fit that criteria of like a 30% year after year kind of like gap in terms of like revenue growth. Because like a lot of tech companies don't necessarily have revenue, but they're like hyper growth per se. And so a lot of those companies got access to like loans where 25% of it is like forgiven if you pay in a certain amount of time, right? And so that definitely helped a lot of like tech companies stay afloat. The other challenge, though, in terms of the programs is like you got younger people that are getting like, we have like a program where they're getting $2,000 a month per se, right? But there was no real criteria. So like you think think in terms of if you're trying to get a grant, right? You got to say where you're going to use the money. What are the inputs and outputs that you're trying to, strive for, and there should be some kind of like KPI tracking at some point in time that, okay, this money actually made real progress in terms of economy and people, whether it's mental health or education or whatnot. And so I have some thoughts on that in terms of if you're giving $2,000, then you're going to use it on learn how to do social or learn how to code, things that are really kind of lacking here. I mean, in terms of talent, the biggest challenge is not enough talent. So I mean, the universities are packed, to fill that gap, but it's still not enough. And so we see a big immigration wave coming, but that itself, I think, can only fix half the problem, because this whole integration thing, right? And so part of in the immigration space, the biggest challenge is not the technical skills, it's the soft skills. How do you work in this kind of environment where it may be very different from where you come from, but it's not because of lack of drive. So we're excited on that front as well. We don't have to kind of motivate them to do things. We just have to educate them, and then really act as that connector, and provide a roadmap. And they don't have to listen to us. They can kind of feel it themselves. And when we use the same kind of lean, kind of build, measure, learn kind of mindset that we don't know, but try this, but this will save you. We know that it will save you time. And we've gone through that process for other people. So each person is different. I mean, things may change and whatnot, but we just try to streamline as much as we can that process. In terms of our audience, people are still very inclined to go to the US. The political climate has not changed their thinking. It's actually, in some ways, in some ways, it's yeah, that's what I want. I mean, people are fighting for what they want, right? Where you maybe come from a system where there's not that many choices, and if you just work within that system and you find your way within that system, you can do quite well. But then that's a difference between a democratic system and a whatever system, right? So it's you never say it's right or wrong. It's you want to come here, we don't really put a label or anything on you, right? We try to help out with compassion and not providing any labels on anything that you do, and also educating people locally. And so, yeah, I had to talk to this lady yesterday, and she was like, "Oh, with the COVID thing, do you find that there's racism?" And I'm like, "Well, we do racism all the time, right?" And even it's quite interesting because we sometimes put ourselves in other people's shoes, and we kind of have our bias there, and then you get the feedback the intention is good, right? The intention is good. For example, we had our Black Founders Month, right? It's celebrate Black founders and give them a platform. And the first speaker that we reached out to, we go, this guy's perfect. He's doing stuff for South by Southwest. He was part of startup grinds, understands what we're doing. This is really an opportunity to separate him, what he's doing with video, the COVID thing. He can give some of his time and help people do videos and whatnot. And he could a workshop, and it'd be great. And I talked to him. He was like, "Why are you labeling me?" I'm like, "Why labeling?" Right? He was like, "I'm just a person, okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, I get it. I totally got it." I'm like, "If you're not comfortable doing it, it's fine." But and that's kind of discussion that we have here as well, the diversity and all that. It's you start to see maybe a little bit of the factions. So it's okay, now it's all women, now it's all men. All men was the problem. Now it's all women, right? And so you kind of get some of that challenge, right? And so I kind of look at it as I don't care if you're a man or a woman, dog or whatever, as long as you have the skill and you drive, right? And you have the same principles, yeah, we're all for it, right? That's how kind of if you're talking about racism stuff, I grew up with it. So it's it hasn't changed per se. It's just people are at that period of time. And a lot of stuff education.
So Henry, on this topic of equity, access, especially with raising and whatnot. Here in the U.S., we have a lot of funds that have raised quite a bit of cash. There's been a lot of support, a lot of talk by by institutional investment firms, banks, et cetera, all like really focusing on women founders, Latinx founders, Black founders, immigrant founders. We've seen the fourth Black-owned like unicorn. We have the Bumble, the first like a young female like unicorn in the U.S. We're not seeing so much of the pushback on those labels. But and to Yorgo's point earlier in the conversation, it is, I think, generally assumed that Canada's a more progressive, politically correct, equitable space. I don't know what. I guess I'm a little surprised to hear.
Yeah, I agree on like a lot of ways, but just like, again, like just the thinking, like what we kind of think and assume maybe, and then when you're actually approaching the person, I mean, not like, for example, there's another group here, I won't name them, but like, they're doing good stuff and they're doing like panels and whatnot and giving like, and so as you're putting events on, you go, okay, well, okay, you're segregating people by not on purpose, but it's like, okay, we'll celebrate these people and then these people, right? And a friend of mine that's with a UN woman, she's like, she's disabled, she wasn't born disabled, got a car accident and whatnot, and she's like, why are you labeling me? Like you just like that stigma, you're not looking at what I can do to help you and whatnot. And then that really kind of like struck with me, and because like I made the intro, like I'm like, okay, this is a person that's doing really interesting things, the whole diversity, the whole like, more rights for women and all that. But her approach was very different in a lot of ways. I mean, there is a bit of pushback as well, but through that process, like, there's definitely like, I think I kind of look at like the authenticity. Are you kind of like supporting some of these causes because it's going to affect your business, or do you really believe in it? And if you really believe in it, if you don't know, like, you can learn more about it, right? And I think that's like the biggest kind of like gap for opportunity. But it's really like having that discussion and taking kind of action on it, right? And so there are a lot of groups. I mean, like Women in Tech, for example, here that we did events with before, that like really inspired like younger people, right? And it's kind of like, again, as an individual, it's like, okay, if I don't associate with that, will I be left behind, right? Is it that's the way that you're kind of thinking, or is that like, no, I really want to learn more about this and then understand like that other insight? It may be something, a bias that I had that I didn't realize, that you're just people. And that's kind of like premise that I've always taken, right? Just like people, no matter, whether you're this or that. And it's like, you maybe have like different values. And then some of the values that like, even through the election process in the US, I learned a lot. And I kind of look at Canada, okay, what are we doing in Canada? Are we standing up for what we believe in? Or are we just like, I guess not the joke, but my parents always say before, he doesn't care anything about sports, right? Like, hockey, it's a very Canadian kind of thing, right? And that kind of got me thinking, in terms of like, okay, we're very fortunate to be here, and so what else can we do? And again, joining Startup Grind was because of the values. It wasn't because it was a startup, it was because of values. And a lot of other groups have those same values, but are they really acting on those values? And that's really kind of like resonated with me. And when you go to like a conference, everyone's like that. It's like, how do you bring that into your own community?
So this has been very, very insightful to hear what's been going on with you this last many months, especially as we look to the future. Yorgo, before we ask him about what he's excited about for the next 6-12 months, do you have any questions before we get to the last couple of questions?
Well, this is actually going to be my question as closing. First of all, thank Henry for his time and his insights. I think, Henry, it is very interesting to see that in more than one ways, the more things change, the more things stay the same, right? But on the other hand, the effort you're making is substantial. Um, is there anything that we can do from here to support what you're doing before you explain to us what are your next, so to speak, objectives for the rest of 2021?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, again, just on another front, where we are kind of like working to bring together investors. So that's part of it's like Chinese that maybe have migrated here, or Persians or whatnot, and that not necessarily be in like the venture space, to educate them on the opportunities here, and not just the opportunities in Vancouver, but opportunities everywhere. And so, I welcome the opportunity for like more collaboration, just trying to understand your ecosystem and some of the things that that you have there, some of the needs and stuff that you can provide even to people here. And I always tell companies the same thing. It's like, okay, you're selling a product, maybe some other place may need it, right? You're not necessary, or a startup might need it, right? And so how can you kind of look and find a working model around that, where they get more customers, and then we have like things that people can try and whatnot. And yeah, I mean the value is also in that we have like a big Starbucks has a big ecosystem, but it's also cross-pollinating and find those needs and wants. So if another group is like better at doing digital, right, then we can introduce them to our companies here. They don't have to kind of like start from the beginning. Or if an agency is interested in doing stuff in this space and they want to get involved, then they can join our chapter, and they can do some philanthropy kind of stuff for the chapter, that kind of thing. So we kind of like leave it. We're pretty flexible in that space, but like if there's companies looking for investment, for example, or they're looking to break into like Canadian market, we're more than happy to work with them and explain some of the the programs and stuff available to them here.
So is there anything that that we can do for you, or the global like collection of directors?
Global question, that's a big question, because like they're doing so much already. So it's like for me personally, I mean, just guess like letting people know more about what we're doing. I guess it's just power. That's like powerful in itself. I mean, I feel a lot of things happen. A lot of things happen for a reason, and like I'm very like values kind of based, like culture kind of based, and like kind of try to do the right thing, no matter how difficult it is. And you've seen that through like COVID. You see how people are working through it. And there's a lot of stuff that's come out even in our ecosystem. Things people didn't even realize that they could do. And part of the community, against like the biggest thing is community right now. I think it's the cross-pollination of information is more important than ever, right? But because there's so much information, how can you streamline it so it's a process that you can execute on?
Great. Well, if there's some connections that you see that we've made, we've got some added context. We'd be happy to help in any way that we can. Yorgo and I. Yorgo, any last thoughts?
Thank you, Henry. Thank you very much, and congratulations on your good work. Really, really meaningful. Thank you.
I appreciate time.
All right. Thanks, Henry. We'll see you again soon. Take care.
Yeah, we'll see you sooner or later.